Today is May 11th, 2021. I have some good news and I have some bad news. Hi, I'm Augie DeBleek Jr., and welcome back to the Pipeline Comics podcast, looking at European comics from a North American perspective, and occasionally more, but today we're actually focusing on those European comics and their creators. Like I said at the top, we have good news and bad news. I'm actually going to start with the bad news so we can end on a higher note. Raoul Cauvin, who I've reviewed a couple of his books, only two I checked on pipelinecomics.com. The Bluecoats is the series he's been writing since 1968. And depending on which resource you look at, it's either somewhere between 62, 65 albums he's written total on that series since then. The guy has been writing the same series for over 50 years and has been chucking out an album a year. Or more, obviously, if there's 60-some-odd albums there. And I covered the issues of the most recent book in a previous podcast. It was episode 55, if you want to get into that, where he basically announced his retirement and his artist didn't know about it, and his artist was taken back. As it turns out, by the way, I can tell you now, the artist is taking on the series with a new writer and plans on continuing going with it, even though the artist himself is 85 years old now. He said he's going to do it until the day he drops. Which may be a bad segue into saying the reason why I'm bringing this all up today is that Raoul Cauvin, who has his own website and commented on his blog this past weekend that at the age of 82, he's not expecting to live much longer. It's cancer. I mean, I'll read part of the Google translation here. Google Translate is great with more formal French. When you get to more conversational sort of message board comments, it gets a little iffy, but I'll skip around to the parts I'm sure are solid. Cauvin wrote, "The oncologist is categorical, still a few months to live before going up there, joining all those who have gone before me. It had to happen to me one day too. Unlike some, I didn't want to create a surprise. I prefer to take a little time to warn you. Here it is. I hope I did well. Yours as long as I can still do it. Raoul Cauvin." So sadly, Cauvin, who again is 82 years old, is maybe the doctor is wrong. Who knows these kinds of situations? I don't know what happened in the background, what's been going on, whether this has anything to do with him leaving Bluecoats a couple of years ago. Doesn't really matter. The end is the end, right? Cauvin is a very popular writer. He's been specializing in comedy writing basically for the last 50 years for the most part. A lot of albums. When I was looking up some more information about him for this podcast, he had one year a few years back where the albums he wrote alone sold like 600,000 copies in 1 year. I think that was like 2004 or so. So at that point, he's in his late 60s or early 70s and still selling hundreds of thousands of copies. Let me give you a quick rundown of some of the series he's been doing. There is Cedric, which Cinebook published one or two of those books. I read the first book. I enjoyed it. I guess I never reviewed it. 23 of those albums total. The Bluecoats I mentioned before, 60-some-odd. Les Femmes en Blanc, which is The Women in White, which is a nurse's humor series. He started in 1986. 31 of those albums are out there. That's one of the series that Dupuis canceled a couple of years ago. They canceled like 3 of his series, and he was, from some reports, not happy that they didn't cancel Bluecoats because that was the one that took the most effort for him to write. He preferred at that point just writing the single-page comics. And he said then and there that he wasn't going to start anything new again. He was old enough that he was done. He didn't have the energy to start new series and get those things up and running anymore. He just let them go. Agent 212 or Agent 212 or however you exactly say it, 30 of those albums since 1975. Pierre Tombal, which I know nothing about, except it's about a gravedigger who talks with the dead. It sounds funny. It's apparently a very funny book. 25 of those albums. Grim Reaper is a recurring character. He's got a rivalry with the proprietor of a crematory and a captain who favors burial at sea. So lots of good, funny running gags about death there. He even did a couple of Spirou Journal albums back in 1983 and 84. He did 3 of those, actually. And also one called Cupidon, which is 21 albums long. That's just a small version of the list, and that's the longest running ones. But he did books all over the place, a lot more than just those. Raoul Cauvin maybe didn't win all the critical awards and praise. He may never have won, the Festival International de Bande Dessinée Grand Prix, but he did amazing amount of work that a lot of people enjoyed, sold very well, and is very funny. Even in English translation, a lot of the stuff that I've read is funny. Bluecoats took me a couple of books to get into, to be honest, but I really enjoy them and look forward to them now. So that is the story of Raoul Cauvin, 82 years old. We'll see how much longer we have with him. The good news is he did write one last Bluecoats story a couple years ago that got delayed. It just started serializing this week in Spirou Journal, which, how's that for timing? He announces this the same week his last story starts being serialized. So that will be available in French, at least, I'm sure, in album format by the end of the year. With Cinebook being so far behind, we'll see it eventually in English. We got a lot of books to go before we get there. So we wish him well in his final days. This is horribly, mortifyingly morbid. I'm sorry, but just want to let you know who he was, what he did, and that, sadly, it's another member of that generation of comics creators. He wasn't obviously the first generation or even really the second generation of Franco-Belgian creators. He is a Belgian man involved in comics, but, we're losing them even from the 60s and 70s, and we'll be sad to see him go as well. On the flip side, there's no good segue here to the good news. This came out on Monday morning first thing. I saw it on Instagram. I saw it on Twitter right away. Exciting, super happy news for me. And I'm sure for you, for those of you who have taken my suggestions in the past and read Beautiful Summers, which is written by Zedro, I believe. I hope I got that right. Drawn by Jordi Lefebre. He is back with another episode of Glorious Summers. Will be out later this year. Actually, I think it's throughout the summer, or may even be out already in France. I'm not sure, but it'll be out this year at some point. I'm sure the English translation will be pretty quick. Europe Comics is usually pretty good on getting on that series, at least. Jordi Lefebre is an artist. Everyone loves him. He's actually Spanish, even though I pronounce his name with as much of a French accent as anything else. I'm sure I'd pronounce it wrong with the Spanish accent as well. But he's one of those French artists that a lot of American artists know and follow and enjoy his work, even if none of it is actually ever seen print over here in North America. He's worth following. Again, read Beautiful Summers. That's all you need. There are other books he's done that I've reviewed as well on the site. You can just search for his name on pipelinecomics.com and see it. Liddy is one of them. Vice Squad was a 2-book series. Lots of great stuff. His latest book is a one-off album. It's an original graphic novel, we'd call it here in North America. In France, they call it an album. It's called now Always Never. The original French title is Malgré Tout, or something like that, which I'm not sure how that translates, but they're calling it Always Never for the English translation. And that English translation is, quote, coming soon. I don't know if that means this month, next month, in a couple months. In any case, it's good to have confirmation that the book, which is a romantic drama, I'm not sure what it's all about, to tell you the truth, because I didn't want to spoil myself. From what I read somewhere, I think it's a romance in reverse time or something. I'm not sure. I've seen some sample pages. They're beautiful as ever. Follow him on Instagram. You'll see more of it. It's Jordi_Lefebre. Check out the show notes for all the spellings and that kind of thing. But it's coming soon. It could come as soon as a couple weeks from now. It could come next month or the month after. I'm not sure. Europe Comics usually drops all of their books in one fell swoop once a month. It's usually about the third week or so of the month, so we might be a little bit early for it to be next week yet. But don't worry. When it comes out, I will be reading it and reviewing it as fast as humanly possible, which for me probably means a couple of weeks. So happy news. Europe Comics is putting this thing out, and I can't wait to read it. One last note before I take off here. Happy 16th podiversary, I guess, anniversary of podcasting to John Suntress and Word Balloon. I was watching his live podcast feed on YouTube last night, which ran, I don't know, like 3 hours long before I finally gave up. He had Tom King there to interview him about his life and the podcast as well. But, Word Balloon it's tough to underestimate John. What John has done over the course of the last 16 years is insane. And what he's doing, especially since the COVID era, where he's gone full-time with Word Balloon and just pumps out an enormous number of interviews, an enormous number of podcasts and videos and all that. It's mind-boggling. He's one of the few people who do interviews in the first place. I think most comic shows are shows like this, where usually it's more than one person. It's a couple of guys or a panel of people talking about comics This one is a one-man operation because it's all I have time to do. I can't put something on my schedule to be a weekly thing with a gang of people. It just never worked out. And I couldn't do interviews for the same reason. I don't have a flexible enough schedule to be able to work that all out. But John has managed to do it with an enormous number of creators that just make your eyes water to look at that list of people he's had the chance to talk to. And talk to them well and entertainingly and in a way that makes it fun to listen to. So consider this my stamp of approval, as if he needed it, for Word Balloon, which was one of the OG comics podcasters back in 2005. He wasn't too far after me. It was good times back then. I should probably do a podcast one day about the early days of podcasting, because those of you who've started in the last 10 years have no idea what it was like to get your show out back then. It is so simple now, and I know I follow the podcasting world. I listen to podcasts about podcasting, and I sometimes have to snicker and laugh at the problems people have and the misunderstandings they have about podcasts, because they have it so easy. You upload a file, you check some boxes, you're done. You don't have to... Yeah, I'm going to have a podcast about this in the future. What it was like to upload the files, to create the RSS feeds, to get distribution, all that stuff in the pre-iTunes era especially was insane by comparison to how easily we have it today, where there's so many podcast hosts competing for your dollar as a podcaster to host your shows and to give you all sorts of amazing tools to go along with it. Okay, I've rambled on long enough. That was supposed to be a 5 or 10 minute podcast. This was episode 65, so show notes for the podcast will be up at pipelinecomics.com/65. Maybe not as soon as you hear this, but soon, at some point this week, I promise, they'll be up. I'm Augie DeBleek Jr. Thank you for listening, and I'll talk to you again, actually, sooner than you think. Not this week, but sooner than you think. We're finding some holes in the schedule these days, and I'm hoping to start slowly bringing this podcast back to life. Thank you for hanging in there. Thank you for staying subscribed, and I'll talk to you real soon.